Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon.
Pompous, condescending, arrogant. We're talking about Mark Carney. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Mark Carney is over in England. He gives a press conference and he is quite the character. He interrupts, he's rude, he's condescending, he's demeaning to multiple journalists, asking him questions about his conflicts of interest, among some other stuff. Let's jump into this. First up, we got this one from Table Salt. It says the OECD calculations reveal that Canada's government debt has jumped to 110% of GDP. This is up from 75% in 2007. We now have the 15th highest burden on the planet. So take a look at that here. We can see Canada right there. And this is where we're quarter 4, 2007. And now this is quarter 3, 2024. So definitely a large increase. Our increase hasn't been as large as the United States or France or Argentina. We got this one from Marty up north. He did a poll here asking what he thinks Carney's next step will be: to call an election, which is the first one here, resume House of Commons, not that many votes, resume the House of Commons with a fall election, or something else. So you can see here the majority of people, 90% of people don't think we're going back to the House of Commons here, and if we do, it'll be a fall election. But yeah, only 30% think we're going to election here soon, and something else, what is that? Well, that's probably getting delayed to 2026. Next up, we got Mark Carney. It says here, speaks after meeting with European leaders. These clips are going to progressively get worse as we go on and on.
The focus is on security, deepening security partnerships with France, with the United Kingdom. Those discussions are necessarily...
So he's talking about why he went to go do this trip. There's a couple of points: deepening security with European countries. Let's go to the second point, though.
Secondly, advancing the support for Ukraine is very necessary. You may have seen that I've invited President Zelensky to the G7. I look forward to hosting him in Canada in June.
There it is. Zelensky, more support for Ukraine. More support. That's right. Keep sending our money to Ukraine while we're under a trade war with two different countries, 25% from America and 100% from China. Jumping over to the next clip, I just want to show this first from Melissa Lansman. It says, remember, you're not allowed to ask the Prime Minister who ran Brookfield, which invests in energy, mining, real estate, infrastructure, and lots of other things, about his conflicts. If you dare ask him what is in his blind trust or the conflicts of interest that arise from the assets in the trust managed by someone, somewhere, we don't know who, that he knew about 5 days ago, he snaps at you, tells you to look inside yourself. I'm sure he'll tell you after the election. So what you're going to see here is him snap at a female reporter from the Globe and Mail, and then he's going to snap at Rosemary Barton. I know some of you be like, Rosemary Barton's not a journalist. To the on-the-fence voters, they'll consider her a journalist. Yes, she's a paid-off woke journalist. More importantly, the way he interacts with women is very startling.
Mr. Carney, Stephanie Levitz, Globe and Mail. We understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm following them well in advance of any of the requirements, as you know, because I know you know this. You know that these requirements come into effect in months. We're talking days after I became Prime Minister. So I'm complying with the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm going through the processes and all these things that are necessary. And I will remind you, and I'll remind Canadians again, that the Leader of the Opposition cannot find it. And look, you look at the questions this evening, you look at the nature of the discussions, look at the nature of discussions I had with the President of France, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The Leader of the Opposition would not be capable of having those discussions because the Leader of Opposition refuses to get his security clearance.
There it is. So he's asked a question about his blind trust, and suddenly it's Pierre Poilievre not getting his security clearance. That's the problem. Just for everyone at home, if you're new to the channel, the reason why Pierre Poilievre won't get security clearance is because then he wouldn't be able to talk about any of that stuff for life. He can't actually protect Canadians by getting that security clearance. The Liberals will argue, sure, you can just secretly push someone out of your cabinet if they're compromised. It's like, no, you can't really do that because then you would be breaching that trust and it would put Poilievre in jail for 10 years. The Liberals are using this as a dirty tactic, and they know full well this would muzzle Pierre Poilievre. I'm sure they designed that system because of that. You notice every time Mark Carney doesn't like a question, he does a quick little smile and like a condescending kind of head waggle with it.
Something that it took me a few weeks to get. And he has been the leader of the opposition for 3 years. So I comply with my responsibilities. I comply with the rules well in advance. And the leader of the opposition doesn't take his responsibilities at a time of, well, you should take these responsibilities at any time, but it's particularly remarkable given the stakes in global geopolitics at the moment.
If he got that security clearance, he wouldn't be able to protect Canadians. He wouldn't be able to warn us who the traitors are in the government. And the fact he got the security clearance, he's not going to tell us who those traitors are in the government. Poilievre has already said, come out and tell us who the traitors are, which goes to tell us that most of them are probably all Liberals.
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as Prime Minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
Wow, he just cut her off. He doesn't want her to say anything. That was really rude. Not a good look, Carney. This is how you treat women? Just listen to this. It gets worse.
You say you are not going to any conflict of interest.
Yes.
Spend most of your time like in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will. I have served in the private sector. I have stood up for Canada. I have left my roles in the private sector at a time of crisis for our country.
Oh, we're so blessed to have Master Carney here. Leave the private sector to save us. This guy is so arrogant, this pompous jerk. We don't want you as Prime Minister. Go back to England, go back to America, go back to whatever country you're living in before you showed up 2 days before to take over as Prime Minister. We don't want you, Carney.
I'm complying with all the rules. Your line of questioning is trying to invent new rules. I'm complying with the rules that Parliament has laid out and the responsibilities of the Ethics Commissioner. And I will continue to comply with those rules.
Wow. Mark Carney here really doesn't like when people ask him about his assets. That's clearly the pain point. The Conservatives need to push down on this hard. They need to push this button hard because this is where it is at. It's got something there to hide, clearly. I mean, this guy's been running Brookfield Asset Management on the board of Stripe and Bloomberg, all these things. He has assets. He has lots of assets. If I were a betting man, I would say they're all conflicts of interest. What's also interesting, Rosemary Barton grilling him on his conflicts of interest. I wonder because in the last week, Rosemary has been striking back at Mark Carney. It's very unusual. You got to think somebody like Rosemary, I mean, journalists, if you want to call her that, journalists, she was a journalist at one point that wasn't paid off CBC shill. These people pride themselves on the truth, credibility, breaking the story, being an honest source. Maybe this is the point where she's had enough. She's had enough of pushing the lies from the Liberal government and she's pushing back. Maybe she's trying to set herself up for another job. Pierre Poilievre wins, defunds the CBC, there's mass cuts. Maybe she's setting herself up for another job somewhere else. Maybe she just wants to try to get a bit of integrity back. I don't know. It's unusual. It's uncharacteristic. But Mark Carney really did not like that question. So much so that he just degraded two women, interrupting them, telling Rosemary to look inside herself, being snappy and rude on the world stage. Not a good look, Carney. Now jumping back to this post here so we can take a look at comments because on that video it's all blocked comments, but Carney is a dedicated WEF soldier, parachuted in to keep Canada beholden to open borders, DEI and ESG. To him, Canada is just an economic zone to be socially engineered and economically exploited. Not a sovereign nation. He wants Canada to pay for this. Yeah, that basically sums it up. Sustainable goals. Look at this Carney guy. I have no conflicts of interest whatsoever, but I'm just going to tell you until I'm dragged kicking and screaming to do so. Well, a little testy, aren't we? He's not my Prime Minister. He doesn't even hold a seat. What an arrogant POS, no doubt in my mind. He will sink our economy even worse than his predecessor. So he won't tell us because the process doesn't require him to? Can't wait until he meets the US president. The first meeting with Donald Trump, he's just going to obliterate him. That's why Mark Carney is scared of Donald Trump. He refuses to even have a phone call with him. Which is what we've got here in the next clip. He's asked about the April 2nd deadline on U.S. tariffs.
On April 2nd, President Trump is promising a much larger global tariff regime, including bringing back in the threatened 25% across the board tariffs on Canada. And you've talked about the need for retaliatory tariffs at a dollar for dollar level. One assumes the punch coming is going to be much greater. How much more are you prepared?
Sorry.
You asked your question.
Yeah.
How much
What? Carney interrupts every female journalist at this event. Actually went through the whole thing, and the French questions, he does the same thing.
more are you prepared to go in terms of the monetary hit back, and how much do you think Canada can absorb, Kelly?
Yeah. This is an important question. It's a very important question. There is a limit, given the relative size of our economies, to the extent to which we should match U.S. tariffs. Right now, what the government has proposed, and with the 150 billion odd identified products, are products that have, as I said earlier, maximum impact in the United States and limited, but not zero. It's limited impact in Canada that we can affect. And my government's commitment is that we will use all of
My commitment. What does that even mean? Why does he keep doing that? It's not the first time.
the revenues from those tariffs to support Canadian workers that are affected by the U.S. trade actions. Pierre Poilievre's commitment, as his commitment is anytime anything changes, is he's going to use it to cut taxes.
Yeah, let's cut taxes. What kind of attack is that? Pierre Poilievre is going to cut taxes, and his recent press conference solidified that. He's going to be the party of cutting taxes. That's what we need in Canada. Mark Carney here is an absolute buffoon.
So if you aren't paying any taxes because you don't have a job, you're out of luck.
That's right. If you're not making any money, you're not paying any taxes, you're out of luck. This guy is unbelievable. You just can't make up this kind of character. He is an absolute disaster. What this whole press conference has shown us is Justin Trudeau is an A-plus liar. He's good at working the camera. Just complete bullcrapping to the camera, because Mark Carney has zero of that. Check this out. So he posted a photo here. Look at Captain Schmuck. Gotta love Monday morning at Canadian Tire. There he is wearing a jean jacket like one of the Backstreet Boys from 1991. Look, he's picking up which looks like a brand new whole kitchen set. Well, you didn't steal that from taxpayers too, Justin? Now, briefly, there's a story about Justin Trudeau that I've known about for a while, but I want it to be verified before I put it on the channel, and that's this coming from Frank News. As you see here, Trudeau's Rock of Love. So we can see the article posted here. There's the same woman there. So this is Justin Trudeau's secret love interest. I guess she lives out in St. John. Her name's Danielle. It says most recently a legalist for Imperial Oil. So apparently she quit her job for Trudeau. They had this secret romance going on while this is going on. And the reason why I wanted to point this out, the fact that Trudeau was dating a lawyer for Imperial Oil with this whole carbon tax thing going on, it's just absolutely preposterous. Moving into the next topic here, we've got Mark Carney essentially bringing out a new carbon tax. He openly admits this. As Table Salt says here, oh my God, Carney just called his industrial carbon tax an enormous opportunity. Says the tax will help Canadian companies prepare to leapfrog the US. I showed that graph on the last video, how America's bar at the bottom there for GDP was off the charts. It was the highest one, and Canada's was the tiny little nothing GDP that hasn't grown at all in the last 10 years. Yeah, I don't think we're going to be leapfrogging the Americans anytime soon.
Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the European Union? Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon. So we are able to think one step ahead. We're able to go out and see the world. We're able to help Canadian companies prepare. And you know what's going to happen? 5 years, 10 years from now, if I have the pleasure of being in front of you, you'll be asking me the question, if we didn't do this, if we didn't help our companies get more prepared, the Americans are going to start caring about this again. They have elections every 4 years. They cared a great deal about this 3 months ago. Now, all of a sudden, they don't care about it.
No, that's not how that worked. You're just talking about the administration that was in power that got thrown out because the people didn't care about that. And if you look what's happening in America, Donald Trump will be done in 4 years, but J.D. Vance is going to take over from him likely for another 4 or 8 years. Vivek Ramaswamy is also chomping at the bit. There's no heroes stepping up on the Democrat side.
They're going to care about it again. We have an enormous opportunity here in Canada. The United Kingdom has an enormous opportunity. France has an enormous opportunity. Europe has an enormous opportunity to leapfrog over American companies. They're trying to turn back the clock and look inwards. We're going to take that opportunity.
It's a whole lot of talk with no proof of what he's saying. How do we leapfrog American companies by putting enormous carbon tax on Canadian industry and business? This guy's out to lunch. He really is. This guy's going to get annihilated in an election where he can't disqualify his opponents. Yeah, no kidding. Let this man speak at every opportunity. I've been saying this. Just let the guy speak. He's destroying his own reputation here as Prime Minister. This is gaslighting 101. He's saying it's important. He's saying it'll help. He's saying everyone will benefit. He's saying Canada will outperform the US. He's a lying hypocrite. The carbon taxes only because he wants to sell out Canada to the EU in spite of Trump. It's part of the brainwashing to get people emotionally unstable when it comes time to voting. And just before he'll run campaigns suggesting Pierre is like Trump, liberals lie. Just a good comment. Carbon tax. Carney is one of the biggest supporters of Trudeau's carbon tax. It's one of the most important incentives in carbon pricing. The Canadian Federal Carbon Pricing Network is a model for others. Effective public policies include carbon prices such as Canada's legislated path to $170 per ton in 2030. He's not getting rid of this carbon tax. That's why he didn't bring in legislation to get rid of it. And with that, we have CBC discussing this. Listen to this nonsense.
Today, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said for the first time that he'll kill the industrial carbon tax.
These taxes drive up the cost of the entire domestic steel industry. This was a bad idea before the Trump tariffs. But now that Trump is hitting Canadian industry with a massive tariff, Carney is saying that he will impose a massive carbon tax on Canadian businesses. The combination of Trump's tariffs and Carney's carbon taxes would be a disaster for the workers behind me.
So the Liberals stand behind the industrial price despite this move from the opposition. You heard what Pierre Poilievre said there, that this is hurting industry. Will the Liberals stick with the industrial price? It's been a centerpiece of your plan to this point.
We recognize that climate change is a reality, unlike the opposition. And so we are going to ensure that we have a policy that responds to climate change, but also responds to the economic tension and climate that we find ourselves in. That's why I've been on the phone all weekend.
See, she admits it. They're doing a new carbon tax. They're doubling down on destroying Canadian businesses. There are so many businesses that have gone out of business because of these carbon taxes. It's just sick. I have so many people send me emails saying I had to close my business because of the carbon tax. For shame, Liberals. Meanwhile, there's no mention of China, China's emissions, India's emissions, let alone the tariffs from China. The hypocrisy is out of control. Just listen to this further on in this interview here.
You've sent in your letter, you've asked them, urged them to buy Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum. Some of the unions are saying this should be required for any kind of a public project from the government of Canada. What about going that far?
I actually have a meeting with additional stakeholders tomorrow, and all options are on the table. I will say this was my first letter issued under a new portfolio after meeting with my deputy minister 10 minutes after I was sworn in, but all options are on the table to
Cry me a river. She's complaining, oh, I just got this portfolio and I don't know what I'm doing. We don't care. Get out of our government. Step down. You already stepped down. Carney dragged you back in. Why? Step down. See you later. At this point, the only Liberal we've gotten rid of is Justin Trudeau. He's not a sitting member of Parliament anymore. He's not an MP.
You know, internal trade was a portfolio that I was heavily involved in. We need to add $200 billion to the Canadian economy.
Yeah, maybe you guys should take emissions caps off of Alberta oil. Maybe deal with interprovincial trade for the past 9 years. These guys literally do nothing but steal our money through their eco-green slush fund. We need a new police force that isn't corrupt to investigate all these people. And I think all Canadians would be behind putting millions of our tax dollars to that, because this needs to get cleaned up. So jumping over to this other panel here.
Rob, what do you make of this move? I mean, there's about 48 countries that have carbon pricing industrially that we trade with as a country. The EU is going to bring in a border tariff in January, and the UK in January of 2027. This is a step further than Poilievre has gone to this point.
And this is what Mark Carney's talking about. The EU's doing some border tariff. They're having their own carbon tax. They're just going to get nuked. No one's going to trade with them. It's stupid. And Mark Carney wants to take us down that path.
And who was it that said that we were? I think it was Brad who said that we're about to go into a RIP period. We're in a campaign now. Mm-hmm. This was a campaign announcement, and it was also, the timing was interesting too. For the last several weeks, the CPC, the Conservative Party of Canada, has looked like it's had trouble finding its footing. This, I think, was an attempt to find their footing again. And how? We haven't had a Trump threat to Canada for a few days, a little bit of a calming in that storm. And so it looked like Mr. Poilievre chose this moment to reestablish the Conservative Party of Canada as a tax-cutting party. It's
always been the tax-cutting party, but this moment did reinforce that. Look how many workers are standing behind Poilievre. Once again, Mark Carney didn't have workers standing behind him. Instead, he put on his helmet and dressed up pretending he's a steel worker and dressed up other Liberals the same. It's ridiculous. You notice Poilievre not pretending to be a steel worker here, doesn't need the goggles and the helmet. He's not a steel worker. He's not trying to dupe anyone like Mark Carney is.
It was one of their keys to success in 2006. It looked like it was an attempt to try and blunt the momentum that the Liberals have had by establishing themselves as a tax-cutting party, and the Liberals have taken it away from them by saying it's a non-issue. But whether or not it's good policy, it isn't very good policy when it comes.
It's good policy. This guy's a bonehead. Don't listen to him. It's great what Poilievre's doing. Going to make our country strong again. Our businesses will not suffer anymore under these stupid rules and laws. What I really like about him doubling down, removing the carbon tax off industry, it's something that Mark Carney can't follow him on. And Jagmeet Singh as well. They both can't follow him. They can't steal it because they keep stealing all of his campaign stuff. Even though Mark Carney is a radical leftist, he'll dip over to the center and steal policies to try to sway voters and trick Canadians who are scared of Orange Man bad. They can't follow him down that road. And that is the road to prosperity. We don't need to be punishing Canadian businesses anymore. Canada will get decimated by America if we don't work together with them. We can't have a radical leftist prime minister trying to negotiate with Donald Trump. It's not going to happen.
Comes to reducing emissions. I don't think there's an economist anywhere around.
But this is bad trade policy as well, and probably bad industrial policy, because the businesses want this certainty and they want it nationally, right?
Yes.
Oh, right. The businesses want this so badly. These guys are absolute boneheads. Come on, guys. I should note they do have one conservative on the panel here. We're going to listen to what she has to say.
So, Amanda, the industrial carbon price by some estimates could be as much as 48% of Canada's emissions reductions. If that goes away, I mean, how does Canada ever meet its emission reduction targets, or is it just a non-starter without these policies?
I mean, I think we just had a conversation where the Prime Minister, who's advocated for consumer carbon tax for the better part of a decade, has just made those disappear, and no one seems remotely concerned. And now it's all going to go on the backs of industry. We have no idea how that's being made up. I think what the Conservatives are doing today is forcing a conversation around that. Say, okay, we're getting rid of the industrial carbon tax. What are you doing with it? Which I think that needs to be answered. I also think we are in a place where we need to be more competitive as a country. And we know right now there are layoffs happening in steel plants across the country. We know that people are taking jobs away from Canada. They're repatriating them back to the U.S. So if there are going to be tax cuts in a way that makes things more affordable, not just to do business here, makes us more competitive, but also means we can save some of those jobs, I think that's a good argument and a good political argument for Pierre Poilievre to make. I also think it puts the Liberals a little bit on their back foot, and that now they have to answer the question is, okay, what are you doing with the industrial carbon tax? Are you, in fact, increasing it? Because the magic that is just going to come out of profit and it's not going to affect everyday Canadians, I don't buy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The Liberals are stuck now. They have to answer to what Mark Carney's big, greasy industrial carbon tax is going to be and how badly is it going to wreck Canada. There's no way Donald Trump is going to be making deals with Mark Carney when he demands carbon taxes on everything industry related. It's ridiculous. Carney's got to get tossed to the curb. Today, Mark Carney fumbled big time. He really just showed his cards of who he is. Not only his policies with the industrial carbon tax, but just how he treats those female journalists. Does he treat all women like that? The guy seems to have a pretty nasty, spicy side to him, pretty arrogant and pompous. Everything should be done his way. He doesn't want anyone to question him because he's number one. He comes across as very much like Justin Trudeau, not quite as childish, but definitely as arrogant, maybe even more arrogant and pompous. It'll be interesting to see what happens here in the next days going forward, because as Mark Carney keeps opening his mouth, he keeps saying stupid things.